Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile Manifesto video. In this one, we're going to be talking about the part 3 Auras, Curses, and Elemental Damage over time. I'm going to keep this a TLDR video. Didn't want to upload another 30-40 minute video, so we're going to keep this one rather short and pick out the things that stood out the most. Starting with Auras. Now, it's going to be a TLDR version of this. I'll leave the link to this thread in the descriptions, of course. The Aura Reservation Reservation Reduction modifiers have been renamed Reservation Efficiency. There's going to be some that affect both life and mana, and there's going to be most of these going to be affecting mana exclusively. So basically the changes they're doing is a very different kind of scaling with these, which I think is rather interesting. It's going to be cool to see because what it does is that it helps lower amount of auras to actually be utilized in a pretty effective way, whereas it hurts the more auras you're running. It's going to be very hard to achieve a state where you actually running all the auras in the game, which is something we've been able to do back in the days. So basically the TLDR is that aura stackers and aura bots are well, they're going to be suicide watch if they're not dead already. I think that aura bots will still be something you can play with. It's just going to be vastly less powerful and or require more currency to get to the point where it will actually be an attractive source of power for a party play. I don't think that they're going to be dead. I do believe that they're going to be severely nerfed, which was needed. And I think that most of the people are very happy about this change outside of aura bot players. Something that actually got me a little bit interested into this post, that was rather interesting in this post, was the changes to the curses. There are not that many people playing curse bots. It's something that has heavily been used in hardcore parties, in racing specifically. It was a period of time where we used a curse bot that also taunted enemies to make them do less damage and do all of these debuffs on the enemies to make sure that the rest of the party was safe. In softcore, it's not used that much, but it is being used in some parties because after a while, parties kind of evolve to the stage where you have a carry build, maybe have a Magic Find build, an aura bot, and then the fourth position player might be a curse bot if it's even needed. So like I said, I think that aura bots will still be fine to use, just not as strong as it used to be. And I think that curse bot will be more attractive to have in the party if you didn't have one before, despite the nerfs that's hitting on the curse bots in general. I think the nerfs of the curses are pretty fair. They're not too extensive. But what's really interesting with these things is the fact that there are curse improvements to specific curses, which is now going to allow us to be in a position with the small cluster jewel that they're changing, so that builds that utilized only one or two curses can actually be in a position where those are buffed. Most specifically, from what I could read, or what I could tell, the Dark build, which has been consistently buffed across the board with every single part of these manifestos. Both the part 1, 2, and 3 has actually increased and buffed the efficiency of Dark Pact, which is pretty crazy to see. Because they only use the Spare Curse, for example, which were now going to be an arguably good decision to scale through a small cluster jewel. So I think these things are actually really cool to see, because it's not just nerfs across the board on those specific topics. Curse bots, however, is in the same category as aura bots. They're heavily nerfed, but will still be functional. But I think that the people that are playing aura bots a lot or curse bots a lot are going to be very upset because the power spike of these and higher budgets is just completely drastically drawn down to the bottom of the sea. The other approaches on this part 3 when it comes to elemental damage over time, it's pretty clear that GGG likes ignitions and they don't like cold dots. That's basically my take on it. They are consistently increasing across the board, increasing the efficiency of ignitions, and they seem to have forgotten that cold dot needs certain aspects to function. So basically what they did is they gave everything about around a 60% buff on the base damage of both ignitions, and cold dots and all those things got about 60% increased efficiency, but they also did some changes to elemental overload and elemental equilibrium. Now the problem with elemental the elemental overload, for example, is actually the fact that they say that the elemental damage over time effects of cold damage over time, burning, and ignite are too dependent on elemental overload and the elemental equilibrium. Ignite's too dependent on ignite damage multipliers. So they made a lot of changes to these things, but with the way elemental overload is changed, let's see if I can find it. It now will give hit and ailment the damage to skills if that specific ability crit in the last 8 seconds. So we can't use a second ability to trigger EO, for example, for the Vortex build that I have. We use Stormbrand and or storms to trigger both EE and elemental overload consistently to give us that extra 40% more elemental damage, which is a multiplicative damage modifier. Now this will only give us ailment elemental damage and hit damage, which means it has no impact to a cold dot build. It still affects the hit component, of course, which means elemental overload is completely fucking useless. So they gave us a 60% buff, but they removed 40% more elemental damage that build was utilizing. The other aspect of this is the elemental equilibrium. Instead of giving the resistance drop, it now applies a stronger exposure effect with 25%, which I think is rather fair. But it's, again, only doing it with the same prerequisite requirements that the elemental equilibrium had before, where it only applies to exposure to the elements that it didn't get hit with. So it basically only works really effectively with skills that are cycling, or if you have a secondary ability that triggers it. So that seemed fine, but they also made the weird decision of moving the elemental equilibrium from the section of the tree that made sense, which is up in the top left corner, where there was a lot of elemental damage sources, and they moved it to the source, to the place in the tree that doesn't give a shit about elemental scaling that much, which would be the ranger area, which is really fucking weird. That's the only big problem I have with the elemental equilibrium change, to be honest. So it's going to be in the ranger area. Basically any build that uses these things will not have access to the exposure when it comes to elemental damage over time, which is essentially the purpose of this manifesto. And then they're just taking it away. They gutted it, and then they took it away, so we can't even use the gutted version. So that, I don't know, I just felt that was really, really weird. The biggest problem with this is that with the loss of 40% more elemental damage for a cold dot, for example, is pretty extensive, but the base damage gets buffed with 60%-ish, and you have to keep in mind that that is base damage, which will then further scale with your increasements and your more multiplicative damage modifiers before you get your end result of damage. So it's actually a very, very big buff, but 40% more was taken away, and elemental equilibrium was taken away from the cold dot. I think that that's going to result in a much lower value of damage output, and it seems like the only pseudo solution GGG brought to the table for this was to give modifiers on gear that allows us to scale damage over time effects. The problem with this is that those damage scaling pseudo solutions that was introduced, well, they work on Ignite as well. So why would you go a cold dot when the ignition is going to be vastly superior? I think this was really weird. I hope they're going to do something to adjust the numbers or whatever when it comes to the cold dot, because cold dots are right now vastly hurt compared to what they did to Ignite, which got rather buffed. Another thing to mention with this short video, I don't want to take too much time of your life watching this video, is the minions. A lot of people have been asking me about this, and that is the fact that they will be looking into pure elemental minions to determine what changes are needed here, and this is also affected by the aura changes, obviously. I think that it is about time that we get a change on minions, because we've been using cold conversion for such a long time, and even so, there are still plenty of physical-oriented builds with Impale and whatnot that are working more than well in the current state of the game. So even if they don't give us a proper solution to elemental minions, we're still going to be able to run physical minions very, very effectively. But it will be interesting to see what they're going to do about this. And for anyone who was wondering about the Sentinels that got hurt with a 40% less HP, I can tell you right now, this is not going to be something you'll notice. A level 23 Herald of Purity, which basically means a 21 gem with the Unnatural Strength Necromancer node, they have about 48,000 HP. So the fact that they lost 40% less life is not going to be something you'll really notice that much, to be honest. So this is not something that we need to mention further than that. That kind of sums up this post. It was much shorter than I expected it to be, even with the spoilers checked out. I think that the auras and curses are going to be very fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'm not too happy about Ignites being so heavily emphasized, and the cold dot seems to be at a risk. EO and EE got some extensive changes, which is going to be fun for me as a guide creator to go through my build guides and see what we can do with them. That's basically all I have to say. If you guys want to let me know what you guys feel about the changes, let me know in the comments below. I'll link I'll give a link in the descriptions to the other videos that I made on these 3 manifestos. So until next time, boys, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content. Until next time, stay safe and keep rocking.